So the next article I wanted to take a look at is entitled COVID-Defying Pastor Loses Lawsuit Against LA Governor's Pandemic Restrictions. This is by Hemant Mehta on the Friendly Atheist website, so let's give it a read and see what it says. You remember Pastor Tony Spell, the head of Louisiana's Life Tabernacle Church, was first arrested in April. Remember April? For aggravated assault against a protester. But he became notorious for holding in-person church gatherings and putting countless people in harm's way. Despite being under house arrest, he defied the law to preach at his nearby church multiple times a week, even asking supporters to send him portions of their stimulus checks. I'm pretty sure this guy has a church of 1,000 or more people. I know that there are mega churches out there that have like 10, 20,000 members every single week on Sundays. Like, I think Kenneth Copeland's church is that big, usually. But 1,000 is nothing to sneeze at. It's fucking big, dude. It's big. So as far as I'm concerned, this guy has a mega church. It depending on your definition of mega church, I guess. I'd define it that way. And he refused to stop holding church services, was put under house arrest for it, I remember. And he was sitting on his front porch at one point wearing the ankle bracelet and saying it's going to be a cold day in hell before he stops holding in-person church services. It came to the point where they weren't even asking him to stop holding church services. They were asking him to do it outdoors or limit the capacity to 2/3 or 1/3 or whatever of how many normally come. And he refused. This guy's a super spreader, an intentional super spreader. It's like he wants this to get worse. If I had to guess, he probably wants it to get worse so that he can accelerate Armageddon. My mom used to tell me Armageddon was coming any 5 minutes now. I would venture to guess this guy feels the same. Let's continue reading. Spell's current legal troubles involve a lawsuit against Governor John Bel Edwards for issuing an order that limits the size of gatherings, including church services. Spell claimed that violated his First Amendment rights. I understand that there's a protection for freedom of religion and things like that in the Constitution, but there are also protections in the Constitution for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By holding church services like this, he is infringing on my right to life and health. There is a 100-year deadly pandemic going around right now, and he is making it spread further and faster as a result of what he's doing. He is infringing on my right to life. From a libertarian perspective, your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose. You can swing your fist wherever you want, except for right here. You not being allowed to swing your fist right here is not your freedoms being infringed. It's a protection of my freedoms. This guy not being allowed to hold full capacity in-person church services during a 100-year pandemic is not an infringement of his rights. By doing this during a pandemic, he is infringing on my rights. From a libertarian perspective, this guy is violating my human rights by holding this stupid fucking service that could be held online. Let's continue reading. But this week, U.S. District Judge Brian Jackson tossed those claims aside, saying essentially that churches aren't being treated unfairly. If anything, they've been given more leeway than public institutions. Thank you! Holy fucking shit! Finally, somebody with a fucking brain in this situation. Let's read his quote. Governor Edwards' proclamations have always treated comparable secular institutions similarly to comparable religious institutions. In the earliest days of the pandemic, the only businesses or individuals who were treated more leniently than religious organizations were essential workers and businesses such as healthcare workers and grocery stores. With every restriction on places of worship identical or more stringent restrictions have been placed on similarly situated secular businesses. Indeed, religious organizations have often been privileged over similar secular businesses. Obviously, this isn't up for debate. This is an objective fact. This is back to Hemant Mehta. He's speaking now. That's a fancy way of telling Spell to stop acting like a precious little snowflake. We're all dealing with the pandemic, and he needs to make the same sacrifice as everyone else. Such a small sacrifice, too. Such a small sacrifice. He could have held 3 services outside with, say, 300 people at each. His church, near the end, though, was only bringing like 600 people out of the 1,000 that usually attend, because a lot of people were concerned about the pandemic, obviously. So he could have held 3 services with 200 people each, or he could have held 2 services with 300 people each, and it still would have been within the bounds of the law. The guy was absolutely dead set on spreading the virus at all costs. I don't get the logic. There's no logic here. Seriously. He was determined to spread it. There's no other explanation I can see. Let's continue reading. The best thing about this decision, Spell's claims were dismissed with prejudice, meaning that he can't raise the same issue again in court or pursue legal costs. Whatever he spent fighting this battle is coming out of his own pocket or that of his backers, which probably means his congregation, sadly. Although I'm sure he probably has some pretty high up Republican backers, too, because Republicans tend to back evangelicals and vice versa. For what it's worth, the most recent order in Louisiana isn't even as restrictive as it ought to be. Rather than prohibiting gatherings of 10 or more people or anything like that, the current order allows churches to be filled to 75% their capacity. It's far too much, but nothing is good enough for COVID-denying Christian pastors who don't want to live in reality. Here are the facts on the ground, okay? At this moment, at the time of recording, I think the highest case rate that we've seen in a single day is like 185,000, maybe approaching 200,000 cases in a single day. That's fucking scary. Thousands of people dying right now. Thousands. Lots and lots of people. We're approaching the number of deaths that took place during World War II, like American deaths. We're coming up on American deaths from World War II right now. That's how many we're dealing with. He can sit here and say all he wants, that he is dead set on not wearing masks and hosting his church services indoors with people shoulder to shoulder. I mean, he can continue doing that if he wants, but it's going to sweep through his congregation at some point. It is going to happen. The fact that it hasn't hit everybody in his congregation yet is amazing to me. Case rates are at like 185,000 a day right now. It is only a matter of time before everybody in his congregation gets it. And I'd be willing to bet that people going to an extremist, fundamentalist, evangelical church like this one, Life Tabernacle Church, I'd be willing to bet they're probably getting up there in their years. They're probably getting a little bit older. I am, for the record, not happy to be reporting this. Not happy about this at all. The fewer deaths, the better in my eyes. But his church is going to suffer horrifically for his stupid, fucked up decisions. His membership is probably going to suffer worse than the general population. I just hope that they come to their senses, his congregation, before it's too late for them.